Hey everyone, Morty Scanlon here. I'm your host for the Flipgrid Live event Pride series. For a visual description, white male, light brown hair, graying at the sides. I'm wearing dark rimmed glasses with a light blue t-shirt and a gray zip up top over it. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm a gay male. I have a question. Do you believe that we are more alike than we are different? Think about it. We're all people, right? Human beings. And each one of us wants to feel safe, loved, and cared for. We ask you to bring a spirit of curiosity to this live event in celebration of Pride Month. Find ways you are similar to our guests instead of focusing on the ways you are different. And please ask questions. Drop any questions you have into the chat. All right then, let's get to it. And welcome to this Flipgrid Live event. I'm your host, Morty Scanlon, and we are all here, well, because Pride. It's Pride Month, and we're going to look at the fight for LGBTQIA2S rights, the work that's been done, where we are today, and the work that remains. To do this, we are partnering with Outwords, the first ever national effort to capture the stories of LGBTQIA2S+ elders in the United States. With us now is Mason Funk, the Executive Director of Outwords. Hi, Mason.
Hello, Morty. How are you today?
Doing well, and thank you so much for joining us here today. So excited for this session. Mason, can you share more about the work that you do at Outwords?
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. So Outwords is also known as the Outwords Archive. As you can see over my shoulder, it's spelled OUTWORDS. We essentially travel the United States, recording, preserving, and sharing the stories of LGBTQIA2S+ elders. You might think of them, if you're a younger person, as your queer grannies and grandpas. Their stories are incredible. They've been on the front lines of the building and the creation of our community and our movement for the past 40, 50, and even 60 years. They've learned a lot along the way about how to make change, how to respond when you suffer a setback or a loss. They're brave, they're courageous, and they're tenacious. And we believe their stories have incredible value, not only for our community, not only for queer youth, but really for the world as a whole. And that's why we do the work we do.
Yes, I am all for legacy and all for stories and history. We so need it to remind ourselves so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So, Mason, from that perspective, why does this work matter?
I think it matters because A, our elders are disappearing, they're passing away, we're all mortal. And B, as I mentioned before, they learned so many techniques and strategies. They learned resilience. They've both experienced pain and loss and trauma, but they've also found their way through and forward. My favorite people in the world are people who embark on grand adventures, not necessarily knowing whether they're going to be successful or not. Those are the heroes in my heart, and the people that we interview, to me, are down to every single one of them. Those are those kinds of heroes, sheroes, and others.
That's wonderful. It's so important that we learn from our elders and their experience. The saying I remember is, experience trumps knowledge every time. So those lessons we learn from elders' experience and those before us is so important to us. Well, for everyone watching, Mason is going to lead a conversation with three people whose lives were captured as part of the Outwords Archive work. They're going to discuss their firsthand experiences fighting for many of the rights we enjoy today, a fight that has been long and hard and is by no means complete and over. Let's learn more about each of their contributions.
I would say to you, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is Mandy, 10 being bring it, 1 being was there any point to get up this morning, I'm a constant 10 because I've seen the change that can happen. Did you ever think, ever in your life, that we would have a black man, the president of this country? I sure did not. He formed this thing called Obama Pride. 5 national co-chairs, and I said, sign me up, I'll work the South. He won North Carolina, he won Virginia, he won Florida. And so if you want to say it's possible, yeah, bring it. And so here we sit, literally on the verge of history and history. Being an out black lesbian, not embarrassed, not ashamed, and not apologetic. Count me in.
I am the first out-of-the-closet transgender judge in the nation. Do you have any idea what role model that is? When I first became a judge, I went to a trans event and suddenly I was the keynote speaker. Everybody was just so excited and they, you know, big smiles, Judge Frye, Judge Frye, Judge Frye. Well, I wasn't handling it yet. And I said, no, I'm still Phyllis, I'm still Phyllis. Well, one young F to M trans man, he put his finger in my chest and he says, these people need to be able to call you Judge Frye, so get over it. So I got over it.
We have to get rights. We have to get people to stop being killed. So we have to realize it takes social change and it's not just visibility. We have to codify this. We need legislation in addition to case law. So then we need to then go back to thinking about our community organizing and the things that we did to get us here. And we need to then look to those trans leaders that got us here. State to state, door to door working by trans leaders that led us to this point. We still have a lot to work to do.
Everyone, we are in the presence of awesomeness. Please join me in welcoming Mandy Carter, Kyler W. Broadus, and Judge Phyllis Frye. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Just want to make sure you're off mute. We can hear your amazing voices.
I'm off.
Yes.
We're here.
Awesome. Give me
Excellent. Oh, Phyllis, you do yourself a disservice. Well, I'm going to pass things over to Mason, who will lead this conversation, but I'd love to start by turning to each of you first by giving everyone some context. So could each of you start by imagining yourselves as 16-year-olds, living as outwardly and boldly and bravely as you do today? What would that have looked like for you back then? Mason, why don't you kick us off, and I'll be back to you after your conversation.
Thanks so much, Morty. Great question. I think we can all relate to it. And I look back at myself as a 16-year-old. I was a church kid, and my church youth group was where I had my best, really my first, really amazingly close friends. So when I look back, and if I were to live as openly and proudly as a 16-year-old as I do today, I would come out to my church youth group and I would say, you know, I'm terrified. I don't know what this means. This was back in about 1974. I would say, I don't know what this means, but I know this is who I am. I want to stay connected to you, and I want to find us a way for all of us to explore what this means together, keep being friends. I get to be me, you all get to be you, and we get to stay connected. That would be how I would live as a 16-year-old. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Kyler and ask you the same question.
Thanks, Mason. When I was 16 in I don't remember what year it was, but definitely, I was born in 1963, and there were no laws. There was no education around transgender people. All we saw were Renee Richardson and Christine Jurgensen on TV. There were no groups, there were no support groups, there were no laws to protect us. And so I didn't have friends. I had acquaintances, and my parents were my friends. And not only were they my friends, but they were my protectors. So I felt like I missed out on most all of my youth because I didn't participate. They tried to push me out of the house to connect. And I felt there was nothing for me because I lived this secret life of being who I was in my head and not externally. So I can only imagine now what it would be like, even with all the things going on. People can live, they can thrive, they can connect, and there was none of that when I grew up at 16. So I could only imagine all the other things I could do then, back then, that are available now. So that's what gets me out of bed every morning, so that people can do and live the life they should, even though there are obstacles now. There was no chance then.
Yeah, Amazing. Thank you so much, Kyler, for sharing that personal reflection. How about you, Phyllis? Who would you be as a 16-year-old and the person you are today?
Well, at 16, I lived a secret life very much, but I was also extremely successful at that age as a boy. I am an Eagle Scout. I was the ROTC commander in my high school. I went to college on military scholarships. I went into the military. They ran me out as a first lieutenant because they found out I wanted to be a woman. I started to practice engineering, and I was blackballed when I began to transition. But, this was all back in the early 60s and the early 70s. It just wasn't possible then. But I meet kids now, and they're afraid. And I keep telling them, I survived all that. And so you can too, because you've got it easier if you'll just come out of the closet.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. Thank you so much. We're glad you're here today to share your story. And how about you, Mandy? I know you had a really unique upbringing that I look forward to having you share with this audience.
Well, first of all, it's so great to be here with everyone, including Outwords. Thank you. I'm part of the post-World War II baby boomers born between 1946 and 64. I think they use the word OG, whatever that means. But I spent my first 18 years as a ward of the state of New York. Our mother had us. I have a brother and a sister, left and never came back. So my first 18 years, Albany Children's Home, Black Foster Home down in Chatham Center, New York, and rounded it out and aged out at 18 at the Schenectady Children's Home. Went to Mount Pleasant High School. So to be 16, I don't even know if I think the word was homosexual. I remember looking at some of the library indexes. I knew there was something different about me. But I must say that I think for me personally, the concept of homosexual in upstate New York at that time was non-existent. But when I think about now, coming out, but also being Black and also being in that system, I just wonder now, any 16-year-old or younger, how that has all dramatically changed. And by the time I figured out I might be coming out and what I was going to be, I didn't even have any words for it. But here's the upside. I had no parents, so I could come out, and I did, proudly at the age of 18, and advocate that now at the age of 72. So that's a wonderful notion to think about anyone on here a part of, might be within that system going forward. Out and proud, out and proud.
Thank you so much, Mandy. And thank you so much for sharing that aspect of your story. We're going to segue to a conversation about what's happening, our history, and how it reflects on the world we live in today. And the first question I wanted to ask you all is to kind of get a sense of the timeline and the remarkable changes we've all witnessed over the past, say, 30, 40, 50 years. I wondered if you could each share one observation about something that is more or less widespread today in the form of queer acceptance and visibility that back when you were starting out might have seemed completely unimaginable. The example I'll give is marriage equality, pretty obvious one. The idea of men being able to marry men legally, women being able to legally marry women, that was pretty much like mind-blowing as recently as, say, 20 years ago. Can you each briefly give a similar example from your own reflections? And in this case, I'll start with Mandy.
Yeah, this is interesting. I want to go back to the reference point, Mason, of post-World War II baby boomers. Remember, we have a lot in common with women. Remember, women at one point didn't have the right to vote. They got that, and we ended up getting that after a long struggle. The military, another one. They weren't allowed in. That changed as it did. But the one that's still sitting out here is jobs. I live in the state of North Carolina. This is a right to work state. Unless you happen to be fortunate enough to have a company, and a lot of them are around the country, that will hire if you're out and visible. And they also have these, what do you call these, employee research groups, whatever. But I think employment then and even currently still continues to be an issue. And just real quick, they're backtracking on the right to vote. You might notice that. We'll get to that later in the program. But I think the commonality of being, and if you're a woman and a Black and a woman and a lesbian or trans, oh my goodness, What are we going to do about that? That's why we're here on this call today.
The number of hurdles that you have to jump through. Phyllis, what do you look back to as a point of comparison, sort of then versus now, where you can witness substantial change?
Well, I was a big part of that change, and I'm very proud that in August, my biography, not autobiography, I didn't write it, some other people wrote it, will be coming out. Oh. And it's Phyllis, Frye and the Fight for Transgender Rights.
Nice.
You can find it on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble right now. But it goes back to the 70s and 80s when I was struggling as an out transgender. And then in the 90s when I pretty much declared war on the gay and lesbian community because they would not accept transgender. Mm-hmm. And slowly it was, you know, the marches on Washington would not put transgender in the name. There were so many organizations that looked down on us. And slowly over the decades, and Kyler was there with me for a lot of this, more and more national and regional and state organizations began to come around. The biggest fight we had was with the Human Rights Campaign, HRC, which finally ended in 2008 when HRC came around. And HRC has been very, very trans inclusive ever since, and is a friend of mine. But if you want to know what the fight was all about, it's all in my book.
Yeah, thank you, Phyllis. And that's such an important reminder, lest anyone think that our community has not fought its own internal battles for inclusion. Thank you for raising that aspect. All minority communities fighting for rights and visibility have to work through their own internal divisions. So we're not unlike other battles for rights and progress, but we have to find ways to come together, as I'm glad you pointed out, we've been able to do at least in some measure over the past, say, 10 to 20 years. Last of all, to you, Kyler, what's the point of comparison you see, kind of a little spotlight on between what it was like then and thankfully, you could say, how things have changed to some extent now?
Well, I see lots of difference, even though there are battles that we still are struggling with now. But there were no rights when I came out and was cast out of the financial institution that I worked for, where I wore a suit and a tie every day, and frankly didn't need anything to transition with. You know, I always looked like a male child, and so there was no question, and it became my coworkers were fine with it, but management had issues with it. And that's still the fight that happens now. Us older folks have experienced it more, but it still permeates the trans movement, even to the youth. So that's an issue that, you know, we see progress on, but there's lots more progress to be made. And so that's where I'll stop there and say, yeah, we've won some battles. We have more battles to win.
Yeah, for sure. I want to transition to the present. There have been a lot of laws passed recently at the state level primarily that seem to be designed, and in fact they are designed, I would say, to basically try to push us, our entire community, off the face of the earth and back in the closet. They want us to go back and be quiet and have our full place in society. I'm not going to go through those laws because honestly, it's been outrageous and infuriating. But for young activists today, I want to hear from each one of you briefly as to what advice you give from your own journey. What has been most useful as a tool for not burning out and for making change in society? And I'm going to go straight back to you, Kyler. No pun intended on straight, but I'm going to go directly back to you. Your thoughts.
Well, I'm glad you did, and thanks also for having me on the panel. I didn't do that right out of the chute, but I think it's important for us to remember we've been here or worse before. This is a community that fights. We've always fought. and we never give up. And so with the backpedaling we see, because you're right, it's a tool to push us back in. We cannot give up, and we will not give up. That's how we got rights. We didn't have rights. You're talking to 3 people that have been there before.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were we were resilient, we were resistant, and we will remain that way. And I think that's important for the young generation to see and to understand, which is why it's so important for us to do intergenerational work.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been resistant to do that.
I love that. I think our young people need to know that we have their backs.
Yes.
And we need to figure out ways to communicate and support each other. Phyllis, what's been your greatest internal ally in the long journey you've been on for staying on course, for making change, and for not burning out?
Well, that was my wife. My wife's name is Trish, Trish, Frye. She passed almost 2 years ago, but we were together for 48 years. And when we met and got together, I was still living as a guy, but she knew that I cross-dressed, and she knew that Phyllis might eventually come to the fore. Mm-hmm. And she decided to see what would happen. And she stayed with me all of those 48 years. And we went through a lot of financial problems because of the job discrimination. We went through a lot of problems with the neighbors. We just fought a good fight. And every time that I was in the middle of some argument with the lesbian and gay community, mm-hmm. or trying to change the law in Houston that made transgenders illegal and subject to arrest, any of that other stuff, she was there, right there beside me. And those of you who are listening, mm-hmm. if you are a spouse of, or a boyfriend or girlfriend of, or a parent or sibling of a transgender person, and you want a role model, simply Google Trish Frye legacy. Houston Chronicle wrote a 1.5 pages on her when she passed. You learn a lot about being a supportive ally to the transgender person that you know and love.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Phyllis. That's incredible. And ending up with you, Mandy, your tools of the trade.
Yeah.
You're burning just at the right level.
One of the things that was interesting, though, and this is, I think, an upside for anyone who's on this today, even though we were in the Schenectady Children's Home, they put us through the public school system. Thank you to social studies teachers. I was in my junior year in 1965. I graduated in 66. They brought some young person in from the American Friends Service Committee, Quakers, who talked about the notion of equality and justice. Then they talked about this notion of power of one. But most importantly, they had a high school work camp in the Pocono Mountains. That's the first time I heard the name of Bayard Rustin. Mm-hmm. Bayard Rustin organized that 63 March on Washington, and everyone remembers King giving the famous I Have a Dream speech. It's the first time I heard their name, Audre Lorde. So social studies teachers in public schools, I think, would be one. But the other thing I find interesting, when I was commenting about here in North Carolina, there was the famous bathroom bill, HB 1 or 2. But then, you know, one of the first thing when that came out, I think, thank you for Reverend Barber in the NAACP, they said, wait a minute, you don't want trans or gay or whatever. And what they say to black folk? That's exactly what they said to us. And then we realized, boom, we had a connector. And that connection still stays to this day. Don't try to do divide and conquer, but think about that. And one of the first people who said was going to come into the state was Bruce Springsteen. And he said, I'm not going to come and perform. I'm going to donate my what would have been my proceeds or whatever to the Civil Rights Museum sitting there in Greensboro. That's a game changer. So I'm amazed at just how creative people can be, and generationally going back and forth, we still have the ability to do that as well.
Amazing.
A good example.
Thank you so much, Mandy. I'm going to invite Morty back in, and we're going to segue into the next part of this amazing program. I want to say thank you to each one of you, Mandy, Kyler, and Phyllis, for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mason, and our panelists. And I'm reflecting on just the incredible conversation that's just been had. And I have a question for our panelists as well, if you wouldn't mind answering. When I reflected upon myself and thinking about my time, I grew up in Ireland, country at the edge of Europe. At the age of 16, I grew up where my existence was criminalized. Homosexuality was still criminalized in Ireland up to that point, to where Ireland is today now, where marriage equality is enshrined in the Irish Constitution, the only country in the world where marriage equality is enshrined in the country's constitution. And so I think of the arc of history and how our community has been so well supported. And then I think of the talks, the challenges that we've just spoken about within the US. So I'd be curious in terms of how you've seen our issues are borderless, how you've seen or stood up or spoken to maybe other parts of the world where you've been present in supporting communities in other parts of the world. I'd be very interested to know, what your worldview is and where you've participated in conversations and panels and fights in other parts of the world outside of the US. Mandy, I'll turn that to you first.
Oh, good. I actually bought a prop because I had mentioned I went to Mount Pleasant High School in Schenectady, New York, and our social studies teacher, Jack Hickey, is the one who brought a person in from the American Friends Service Committee. While I was at that high school work camp, I also heard about the War Resisters League, and I graduated high school in 1966, ended up going to San Francisco. To make a long story short, I joined the War Resisters League office in 1969, and I still have the calendar. There it is.
Wow.
I was on staff. I'm a pack rat. And you know that, Mason, because you all have the stuff that's in this calendar. That was a game changer, and because I didn't have to worry about being out or visible, but we did more than just resist particular wars. We were thinking about, and also real quick, the War Resisters International now, it's like having its 100th year. So there's realities of being in this United States of America, and then there's the realities of what we do in terms of the international around race, class, gay, lesbian, bi, trans, whatever, that would be a good example. But that was a game changer, and WRL still exists to this day, as does WRI and A American Friends Service Committee. So please check out some of the international organizations that have a very specific LGBTQ plus connection.
Thank you so much, Mandy. Kyler, how about you?
Well, we worked with the UK early on with doing work in with trans work, and Dr. Stephen Whittle there when they were a bit ahead of us, actually. And so they were helping educate us, and then we've done some reciprocity back. And then I've worked with African countries and some other countries through meeting people of other colors and races through WPATH, and worked with them through my group, Trans People of Color Coalition, and connecting and sharing information across continents to help make lives better.
Wonderful. Phyllis?
Game changer would be in 1991. I was fed up to the gills with the fact that transgenders were not included. Every newsletter that I got from any national organization was either lesbian or gay or lesbian and gay, and we were constantly excluded. And so I began, and the first conference in 1992 was called the International Conference on Transgender Employment Policy, and we had 6 of those, and a few people showed up, but for the first one, then they kept showing up for the subsequent ones. As it turns out, I am personally responsible for the training of and the mentoring of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th generations of trans lawyers, and all this stuff that's going on right now can be attributed back to those 6 conferences. This is all in the book, by the way.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. And folks that are listening and watching, I hope you've picked up all that wisdom that's been dropped in terms of the international presence our panelists have had as well, too. Because remember, our struggles as a community are borderless. With that, it's time to take a bit of a change and think about honoring those that have been in our lives. So to our panelists, each of you will take a minute to honor a figure in your life who helped you come to terms with who you truly were. You'll say their name and then tell us how they helped you be more you. Mandy, I'll turn to you first. Who is that person for you?
Audre Lorde. You can see that or not. I never met Audre Lorde, but remember I heard her name and heard about her at the American Friends Service Committee's high school work camp when I was a junior in high school. Fortunately, I never met her, but the fact that she has books out like Sister Outsider and also Sister Outsider, also just real quick, when I read this book, little titles in here, like Notes from a Trip to Russia, Poetry's Not a Luxury. I mean, the sister had such a gift of words, but also action as well. So I am forever indebted to Sister Audre Lorde. Pass it on.
Thank you, Mandy. Kyler.
Well, I have to say there are two people. I wanted Mandy to get that shot in of Audre Lorde's book, but I have to say there are two people that really have made me me. And whenever I write a speech, they always enter the speech whether I write them in or not. And that's my mother and father, who were children of slaves, so hence they were slaves. And they had no knowledge about trans people as we know them today, but they loved their child and they loved me without limits and unconditionally. And so they made me the strong person that I am. And I always call them my rod and my staff. And it's true. They made me strong to do the work that I do. And they said, always speak out, always be you. And that's who made me who I am. And so I'm forever grateful to them. They're no longer with us, but they're always with me. And so I'm thankful to them. And I'm grateful to have been born to them.
Thank you, Kyler. That's just wonderful and heartwarming in the extreme. Phyllis, you mentioned Trish earlier, just a few moments ago, and what a wonderful support she was to you in your journey and living your truth. Do you want to speak more about Trish, or was there another person you wanted to reference and saying their name?
Well, this is what she looked like. She was gorgeous.
Oh, absolutely.
I know when we first met, I had my wrist in stitches because I tried to kill myself. The military had just run me out. My first wife was divorcing me, and I was a real mess. And I met this woman who's 5 years older than me, who was a professional, and she was very sophisticated. And back then, she was one of the first people that owned a Ford Mustang. I mean, she was hot. She was really hot. What she saw in me, because I was still living as a guy then, I don't know. But I came out and told her what was going on. And she thought about it a long time. And she said, well, if that's all that's wrong, I'm going to give you a chance. And so we got married. And for 3 years, I tried to be a guy. And as I said, she said, you just got to be who you are. And it was difficult for her because she had to make compromises. I mean, she had married a guy that had a beard. And now she was married to a woman. And but she let me take hormones, and I grew breasts, and I got my name legally changed. And I went through all of this. She asked me if I would stop one step short of having genital surgery. And I thought, you mean I get to keep her? What a deal. So, we went through all the stuff that I've described and is in the book. And in 1995, she said, as far as I'm concerned, you've given it your best. If you want to have surgery, I'll stay with you. And I thought about that a long time. That was very generous of her, as she was a generous person. I decided not to. And but when she passed away almost 2 years ago, and I went through a lot of my grieving and was coming out of it, two wonderful things in my life happened. They've happened in the past year and a half. One was I decided that even at the age of 73, it was my turn and I was going to have surgery. And last weekend was the 1 year anniversary of that. And I live in a senior
Congratulations.
center. I live in a senior center, and 6 of the women that are my good friends, they threw me.
Oh, Phyllis, I don't want just the
I know.
biography. I want the movie. I want the movie. I'm here for it. I'm showing up. I'm going to every movie theater across the country to see the movie. I can't wait for it and to make sure it gets the Oscars.
And the second thing is that love did find me a second time.
Oh,
And I'm in a 14-month relationship with a beautiful woman.
Phyllis, that's just amazing. Thank you so much. Well, Mason, I don't know how you follow that, but Mason, who is your person?
Well, one thing I'll say is what I love about Phyllis's story. It reminds us that activism is activism, but love is what keeps us alive. And so I really appreciate that reflection that, we can be lawyers and learn the law and go to court, and those things are necessary. But I'm so grateful that Phyllis has had that, was willing to share that story of love in her life. For me, I looked back over my life while the others were talking, and I just want to invoke the name of a teacher, Susan Dodd. She was a writing teacher of mine, I don't know, about 30 years ago, maybe. What she taught me was that I had something to say to the world. It wasn't really about me being gay, but really, I think she planted the seeds for me to think of a project like Outwords that would gather stories. I love storytelling, preserve them and share them with the world. And she had a big influence on me for a person whom I only knew for about a year back in the mid-1980s. So I want to just say her name out loud. She's still alive and she's an amazing person, and I want to pay tribute to her.
Thank you so much. And incredible people in your lives, just I hope gives inspiration as well to people watching today to know that there is one out there for you as well. We're going to wrap, and I just want to say it has been an absolute honor and privilege to share this space with each of you today. Mason, as we wrap, I'd love to hear any final thoughts you'd like to share with everyone watching.
Well, as you can tell from these 3 incredible individuals, there is, I call them a cloud of witnesses. They're the people who led us out of the wilderness and towards the promised land. We're not there yet, but we're on the journey. For those of you who are younger out there, and maybe even quite young still, and who are still figuring out the world and your place in it, these are the people on whose shoulders you stand. You wouldn't have some of the options that you have available to you today without them. Additionally, these are the people who have your back, and they and we are cheering you on. We're giving you all of the love in our hearts. We're thrilled by you because you were going to lead us and the entire world into the next generation and into our futures. And we just want to say we are with you. We are excited about you. We want to get to know you and share our stories with you. Go to the outwordsarchive.org and remember to spell Outwords correctly, OUTWORDS, like words, the outwordsarchive.org, and you can find tons more amazing stories like these 3 people.
Thank you, Mason. Gosh, as Hamlet put it, my heart is cleft in twain because it is so swollen with pride and admiration for all of you folks at Outwords. But I also know, and it does ache for the pain and unpacking some of your trauma here today, that I know each of you has experienced as part of your past and of your fight, and just really being your authentic selves and living your life. But today, I see you and we celebrate you for how much easier you have made it on our LGBTQIA2S spirit youth and our friends in the community. And they have things today, as you've mentioned, Mason, that would not exist if not for your advocacy and for the work that you've done. So I thank you for your work, and thank you all for being here today and for showing us how living in your truth has made you the amazing people that you are.
Thank you so much to everyone here. Thank you, Morty, and everyone.
Thank you all.
Everybody.
Bye for now. See you next time.
Thank you all. All right, everyone, I have a super special invitation for each of you out there. Outwords has put together a collection of Flipgrid topics called LGBTQ+ activism. Head to aka.ms/The Good Fight to continue today's conversation. This will take you directly to the collection with 14 different topics featuring many different voices. Each one will give learners a powerful chance to reflect and respond. So that does it for today. But the party is never really over because we have Flipgrid live events every week, including 2 more as part of our Pride series. Head to aka.ms/Flipgrid live events to register. Everyone, it's been an absolute pleasure having you all today. And again, a special thanks to our panelists from Outwords. Thank you for spending time with us today. We are so grateful. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.